little bit about who I am. I'm Dr. Peter Cummings, and my world is the brain. I'm a neuroscientist as well as a physician. And my real area that I get really excited about is the neural control of motor function. And Gait has been a huge thing for me for a really long time. And I think if you ever ran into any medical students, when I was a professor at BU anatomy, I would say 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was saying that gait is the window to the soul, it's not the eyes. And so it's amazing to have a tool like SportGate to be able to show that with data points. I started off in this world with TB12 Sports, with working with Alex Guerrero. We split the TB12 Sports into two separate companies. We're TB12 now, just the supplements and all of the protein powders and all that kind of stuff. And we took the services and we relabeled it and rebranded as TBRX for total body recovery. Part of that reason was that nobody really knew what TB12 was. It's an exercise, it's a diet. Well, it's a total body recovery. And that's the philosophy behind everything that was done at TB12, that was done with Tom and countless number of athletes and sense in what we do with athletes currently. So as we go through these lectures, I'm going to show you how I use Sportgate in an athletic setting, how I use it with my athletes. And then at the end of each lecture, I'm going to give you a little TBRX nugget that will help you implement a new kind of intervention or something different into your athletic population that you might find if you find a particular risk factor for hamstring or calf injury, how we would prehab that essentially or activate that muscle before practice, before a game, so we reduce our injury risk. Um, so with that, I think what I should do is probably share the screen and get started here. So share, I'm gonna share my Chrome, and then we're gonna go to present full screen, and there we go. Are we good?
Let me get
I
a
don't know if Beth can tell
second.
me.
Let me see.
You see the first slide?
This is
We good?
waiting for my team to respond.
I need a team.
It is nice to have.
Why are they so slow? Where's your team?
There's, they said they cannot see it.
Okay, so let me try. I'm gonna share this. How about now? I want to go to presenter. I'm gonna go to full screen.
We still have all eyes on you.
All right, all eyes on me. I should do some moves. I'm sure that I'm sharing my full screen. Hopefully you guys can see it.
We cannot.
Oh, let's try. You guys can just see me.
That's correct.
Sure. Okay. How about now? Looks like I'm sharing now. I think I may have forgot to hit the share screen button.
Yes.
Woohoo. All right. So I'm good to go. Okay, the hidden power of baseline, how gait tells a story before injury does. So what I'm going to do today is sort of take a 10,000 foot view of the baseline report and try to walk you through that. So each subsequent lecture, we're going to get deeper and deeper into the details of the data we can pull out of a baseline report. So that's our idea today, is to show you what's hiding in there and how we can be using our baselines um, to look for areas where injuries might be hiding. My philosophy is that soft tissue injuries are completely avoidable. Non-contact soft tissue injuries are completely avoidable. And if we find the right clues to where they may be lurking, then we can put interventions in and fix them. So that's my first thing today is how to reframe how you use Sportgate. And I don't know um, what your usage is of it, but in my world, what I would do originally was I used it mainly as a concussion baseline testing tool. I did my concussion baseline testings, put it in my pocket, and didn't use it again until um, I had an unfortunate situation where I may have had to do a return to play. What I started to notice during that process was that the athletes I was seeing who had concussions tended to develop symptoms that reflected where they performed poorly on baseline. So I started to think, well, maybe is there a way here if we see low baseline scores? Is there some type of protective mechanism I can put in here during the season that could improve them from baseline? So if we have a low baseline score, I can put a exercise in or a cognitive test in that will get them to improve that metric throughout the season to give them some resilience. So as I show you the data that we go through, I want to give you actionable things that you can do just by looking at a baseline report, things you can start implementing as we get closer to summer sports and fall sports ramping up again. Some things that you can start doing today. And then I want to get you guys really excited about what's going to happen in the future and the different levels of detail we're going to be able to capture. And I'm going to show you some real examples on how we use this in youth athletes, how I use it in professional athletes, and hopefully get you really motivated to use the app. I cannot move to the next slide. There we go. So the beauty of what I love about Sportgate is that it's a combination of the brain and body in motion. And with that in mind, the gait isn't really something that just is how somebody motivates through an environment. It's not, posture and motion. It's how the brain, muscles, joints, and your cerebellum, your vestibular system, how they all communicate effectively under stress. Because when you think about standing in a static position of posture, with gait being posture and motion, we're under stress, we're under load, we're under fatigue. So how does the brain and body, how does that connection work? And so I like to think of gait as the sixth vital sign. And the reason why is to think about things we look at in vital signs, they've got to be objective, dynamic, predictive, and integrative. So if we look at gait function, it's measurable, it's trackable. We see changes with fatigue, pain, or recovery. We can see changes as we begin to move somebody through a recovery process. It's predictive. As you'll see, we can pick things out of here with a combination of the gait and cognitive testing before symptoms start to appear. I mean, my quote on this, you'll probably get sick of hearing in this talk, is subclinical is not invisible. And then it combines the physical and cognitive performance signals. So it integrates everything. So it's a perfect way to look at how gait can be used as a vital sign, something you should be checking. And some people you may hear gait as a vital sign is just speed, but we look at things very differently. We think of with sport gait, I like to look at it as an EKG of the entire body, where we're looking at different components of gait. We're not just looking at speed, we're looking at acceleration, we're looking at displacement, we're looking at multiple different metrics, which give us a much better idea as to what's going on here. Athletes are a different breed. I don't care if you're any sort of competitive athlete. They have a drive, they have a desire to compete, and they compensate very well until they can't, until something breaks. And what we do with gait is we try to find these imbalances, the asymmetries, how fatigue affects things with different types of drifts and sway, how your chunk compensates when you're tired. So the gait is telling us the story before the athlete gets onto the field and becomes late in the game or late in the week in practice and they break. We can find these things ahead of time. And athletes tend to be able to use compensatory muscles or muscles they shouldn't be using to cover up what you would see in a normal gait. Watching an athlete run, watching an athlete perform a task, the gait may look normal, but we're using muscles that probably aren't designed to do the task they're doing, which is why we pull hamstrings, why we pull calves, that sort of thing. So good jump right to Sportgate and what it's measuring. And we'll go through each one of these. So when you pull out the app or look at it on your desktop, however you manage to look at it, we're really looking at these four overhead kind of topics of gait. We're looking for power, stride, stability, and symmetry. We're going to go through each one of these. Power, we're looking at striking force, so the total amount of energy that's produced when your foot hits the ground. We're looking at pushing force, which is how much energy you generate by lifting your foot up off the ground. When we look at the results, this is a post-test result. When you do baselines, there'll usually be a straight blue line. You'll see where on the bottom, where on this graph on the line they are compared to an age matched normative data, and you'll be given a T-score of where they fall in the normative range and on that scale on the side. So that reflects the striking force and the pushing force. We also have stride, which is our stride time, our stance time, which begins when one foot hits the ground and ends when that foot leaves the ground. The swing phase, which is when one foot leaves the ground and then ends when that same foot contacts the ground. So when we're standing and when we're in swing. And then we have double stance phase, which is how much time you spend with both feet on the ground. And again, the same thing you'll see in the app, our stride indicators, where we are related to normative T values is what that scale is showing you when you look in the app. Stability. This is a big one. One of my ones I go to quite frequently. A lot of things hide in here, as we'll see. We look at sway, which is side to side sway. We look at sway as back to front, and support variables, which is the bottom line, which tells me when one foot leaves the ground and when it becomes in contact with the ground. So when you're in a single leg or swing stance, how stable is your single leg stance at that time? So we get side to side, back to front, and single leg support metrics there. Symmetry, power, stride, stability. So we want to look at how when we're exerting force, is it equal? Does one side greater than the other? Same thing with stride. Is everything uniform? Stability. Are we able to maintain balance when we're in single leg stance? Or are we favoring one side versus another on double leg stance? For looking at where our gait cycle is symmetric. So then we're going to give everybody the Connors test here. So just tap your screens. We've all been through this. I'm joking. You don't have to touch your screens. The idea with this test is that you hit all the letters except X. Don't hit X. And what that's telling us is, and it's Connors continuous performance test, and it's a very reliable identifier. It's been used for neurological issues. It was first used as a concussion test, and then kind of became part of the ADHD world, and now has been used, come back to look at concussion metrics. But it's a really great measure of executive function, cognitive endurance, and working memory capabilities. So not only is it really great for attention issues and people who may have attention deficits, whether it's a concussion or a learning challenge, it also shows us where we may be falling down with brain fog, where fatigue. We'll show you some cases of what happens when an athlete becomes cognitively fatigued. And we can look at these trends over time to look at how somebody's cognitive function is going. Sleep-deprived athletes will have poor performance in this, and we'll test them repeatedly to see if if we clean up their sleep hygiene, is their cognitive function getting better? So it's a way for us to look at how their cognitive function is improving while they're under stress of the course of a season, or the course of a preseason, or when we're doing off-season training. It's super easy to do. It takes 7 or 8 minutes. User friendly, as you guys hopefully all know from using the app, and you can do it from anywhere. I have clients that I see that are all over the world. California. I'm in Maine, so they're California, Maine, New England, Florida. We have people everywhere that are able to take this test. So it's super easy to use. And a really reliable test of what's going on inside of your ability to maintain executive function and cognitive endurance. Why does it matter? And again, we're taking this from an athletic standpoint. Again, if we do the baselines, we're just looking at, baseline, put it back in my pocket. If I have a problem, I take a look at it. Here, we're looking at how I would use the CPT in an athletic setting. And these aren't all of the metrics that the CPT will measure, but these are the ones that are important for me. And we'll dive into a bunch of these as we go through this series. Hit reaction time, mental speed, omissions are missed responses, which tell me that there's some inattention. Commissions, which is wrong responses, and that tells me that somebody's being impulsive. They're just hitting. One of the huge ones that I like is hit reaction time, standard deviation, variability. That tells me how much stamina somebody has. Can they focus? And I hope that everybody here has at least tried a baseline, because the CPT is no joke. That the test is actually really exhausting. How people perform on that with their standard deviation of the hit reaction time as the test progress is a huge thing for me for focal stamina. And preservations, repeated mistakes. So how often are we repeating the same mistake? How that translates into sports is with mental speed and hit reaction time, are we making quick decisions? What's my reaction time? And how does that play out towards the end? Is this individual going to not be able to make great decisions or quick decisions late in the game if they're showing fatigue towards the end of a CPT test? Omissions, the inattention, loss of focus. Are they going to drop balls? Are they going to jump off sides? Are we going to miss reads? Commissions, which is the impulsivity. Are they jumping off sides, committing fouls? Um, Hit reaction time. Again, mental fatigue, poor execution late in the game. This is where mental mistakes happen. This is the stuff that's lurking in the fourth quarter, late in the second half, um, deep into a set in a tennis match. It doesn't matter what sport. This is what translates into late game decision making failures that can be detrimental to a, a team in a win loss situation. Preservations, do I keep making mistakes? And this is poor task switching and poor adaptability. Can this individual, is this person able to over time adapt? Are we able to switch tasks? If I got to change a defensive formation, or if I've got to change a tactic, I need to, make change my defense in basketball, pick a sport. If I need to switch tasks, is this person going to be able to do that? Hmm. Sometimes it just does not want to switch slides. There we go. So the thing that is interesting that about the order that we do this test, it's very important to do the CPT first and the gait second. The reason for that is that the CPT is really a pre-exhausting or pre-fatigue state. So we first test the CPT, we've stressed the brain, we've given it a bit of fatigue, and then we do the gait. So what's going to happen is because I'll show you in a second, there's such an intricate communication between the brain and our areas of executive function and motor control that if I have areas where I have weaknesses in my gait or weaknesses in my motor control from the brain, they're going to show up in the gait when the brain is tired. So it's a stress test. It's a brain stress test. And when I add the CPT to the gait, I can spot early mental fatigue. I can predict movement, not just errors, but imbalances, asymmetry, power failures, and I can take that information and use that to be able to set up some type of program where I can reduce my injury risk and increase the performance of the athlete. And this is what I'm talking about. So the brain, there are different areas of the brain that control different areas of the body. And we think of the brain being cognitive, emotional, and motor, sensory. All of those aspects of cognitive function come into play in gait. And so if we look at executive function, which really and attention, which come kind of from our frontal lobe area, that has a lot of weight in how pace, variability, and rhythm of a gait comes together. Um, Visual spatial stuff, where we're trying to translate what we see in our environment and predict, because the brain is an incredible predicting machine. And if we can't predict accurately, if we can't predict when we're tired, which will show up in the CPT, I'm going to have that same problem when I try to translate that into movement. And when I'm looking at an athlete, that 5% difference may not mean a whole lot to um, an individual like myself who just, does recreational kind of stuff. But for a high achieving person or somebody who really wants to be successful at what they do, that 5% difference can make a huge um, a huge gap in performing. So what I'm going to try to do, and this is my actually currently my dinner table. My son's working on a Lego set. I'm going to throw my son under the bus throughout this entire lecture. So don't feel sorry for him. But what I'm going to try to do and show you is when I create a performance profile for an athlete, which is how I'm going to use this information. I have 16 points that I put together in about 2 pages. Over the course of the webinar, all of the series, I'm going to show you how to do that. So think of all of these metrics that we're measuring. All of the four big ones from Gait, all the stuff we're looking at the CPT, and think of them as Legos that we're going to be able to arrange them in very different patterns and very different sequences that are going to tease out different information of what we're looking at for vulnerability. So they may seem like a bunch of random testing metrics right now, power, stability, swing, hit reaction time. They may seem individually unrelated, like these Legos on the right, but we're going to put them together into various patterns that are going to be able to show us where things are lurking. So when you open up today, I'm just going to stick to the baseline testing, and just really to show you again a really high level view of what you can do today from your baseline, and then we're going to get into much more detail as we go forward. So when you open up your screener assessment and you're trying to look at the results of an athlete, this is the menu that you'll usually see. The view the results in a PDF, which is fantastic. All the information that you get in the view results tab underneath that are on that. It's a great resource. I print that off a lot. If I am working with an athlete and they have a pediatrician or a doctor or some other healthcare provider, I print those reports out as we go through a return to play, or as we go through a rehab for a hamstring or calf strain, and make that information part of the record. It's really, I find that clinicians really enjoy seeing that kind of stuff, as do parents, as do athletes. And there's a bit of gamification with them too, to always try to push them to improve their scores. Um, so again, I'm gonna throw my son under the bus, and I'm gonna use his baseline um, to walk you through how I would now look at a baseline versus just doing a baseline and putting it in my pocket until I need it. So he was a high school male athlete. He had what's called left hip pain, but it was a piriformis issue. Um, we did a routine Sportgate baseline. This was from July of 2022, and the initial assessment was that everything was normal, nothing to worry about. And if I blow it up and show you his report, you can see everything here looks good. There's really nothing to worry about. So if I'm doing this as a concussion baseline, I got a whole team. I don't know if everybody's going to look at all of these baselines. But I got a couple little flags here. I got 1 out of 6 and 1 out of 5. On a baseline, am I really going to worry too much about that? I'm only going to look at that again probably if I have a concussion return to play, and I want to see are we improved from where our baseline scores were. But there's so much information hiding in here in these T scores that we'll get to. Just wanted to show you his report is pretty normal. We have a lot of tests for him because unfortunately he lives with me. And everybody who comes into my house essentially gets a Sportgate test. Um, all of the metrics that we're looking for in the CPT. So here's the CPT, um, primary indicators and secondary indicators. Primary indicators for a concussion, we're not going to talk about concussion today, are the big heavy hitters, the things I'm going to see where there's a disruption in executive function or memory or other cognitive effects from a traumatic head injury. The secondary indicators are supportive. So the more secondary indicators I have, it really sort of helps me with my clinical judgment of the sort of things that I need to worry about when I'm returning somebody to play. But for a baseline, all these sort of things kind of line up. Doesn't look all that bad. I look at the T scores over here all the way to the right, how he matches up in this population. I got the hit reaction time standard deviation is a little low. I mean, it's low. And one thing I want to point out about, uh, I'm going to come back to this score in a minute. One of the things I want to point out about CPT T scores is that lower T scores imply better performance, which is different than how we think about Gait uh, T scores, where in the Gait functioning, higher T scores are considered better performance. And again, we use the two standard deviations here for under the curve, as you would statistically. I also get the score history of how he's done every single time. Unfortunately, I've had to put him through this test for various experimental reasons. So I'll see that at baseline, look at it. Everything looks pretty straight and narrow. I'll move along. I'll look at the Gait. Um, I got a lot of things here. I got a little power drop here and forward power. I look, he's sort of at the bottom end of the low score on the T score on his curve. His total power is a little low. Again, I'm just gonna put it in my pocket and wait until something nefarious happens to look at this. But again, as I mentioned, when I started looking at concussion cases, I started to realize that the young athletes that I had, or athletes I was putting through return to play protocols, they had their lowest scores in their post-injury screening where they had their lowest baselines. And kind of a tangent, but concussion likes to fight dirty. It'll use any sort of vulnerability that you have in your brain against you. So if you have a propensity for motion sickness in a car, you're going to have a lot of motion sickness vestibular system issues. My son has ADHD, so he had a concussion one time falling off his bike, and it was like he drank 58 Mountain Dews. He's flying all over the place, even though he didn't have any somatic or other complaints. Um, so I started to see this and I wondered, is there a way that if I see a low baseline score that's below average, like his forward power and his total power, is there something I can do before practice, throw three or four things in to activate the muscles that may be responsible for this, to sort of give him a little level of protection? If I can increase the resiliency, I might be able to, I'm not going to say we can't prevent concussions, but maybe make the symptoms less severe, make the recovery time faster, something, just do something to see if I can't improve that baseline score, which is kind of how I got started on this little mission that we'll talk about over the next few weeks. So now we're going to get into the gait indicators as we go through striking force, and we get power. We have stride, which is stride time, stance phase, swing phase, double stance phase, which is important for me if I'm looking at someone in pain with an antalgic gait. They may spend more time on one leg, less time on the other. They're trying to get off or offload that painful leg. His stride time all looks pretty good. We're at the higher end of this T score. Um, his balance scores, again, we have some balance issues a little bit here with his side power, so side to side. Um, 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 Balance is a little bit off. Um, and you can see this in the T score. So even though his T scores look good, he's got a little bit of weaknesses here that I put in my pocket and didn't really think much about. Here's his symmetry scores. Again, down the line, looks pretty good over here on the curve for um, all his T scores and where he is in his normative data range. And then at the end, if you look through these reports, it's really good. And you can do this in the results menu as well as click on it. It'll give you an explanation of what everything is, which I find really helpful. So let's beep from this. And we'll go to the next slide, which is basically this. This is what I would look at and see for my visual baseline. 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, nothing to see here, time to move on. So when I look a little closer and I really want to pay attention to some of those T scores, some of those, the balance and power T scores were pretty low. Which gives me, on his power, he's got some propulsion issues. He's not having a lot of power on his push off, and we're having some issues with his lateral stability. According to the T scores, his stride and symmetry are normal, and his CPT was normal. There were no flags that I would worry about with in a traditional kind of baseline sense. The other level of detail we could look at, and we saw some of that in the PDF report, but if you go down to the next item in the menu and you click on view results, we get a whole lot more data. And you can click on each one of these windows, cognitive and gait, and we can blow up the areas that we want to see that we saw also on those reports, but we get a little bit more detail. So if I want to look at his power profile, we've already seen these bar graphs. We saw those in the PDF report, but there's something else here that is very important. That bar graph is great. It's telling me where we are in a normative sort of sense in a T score and a total average of where we are in power. But what's it telling me about left and right? Where am I having problems? And that graph at the very top, if I can go back, this graph at the very top is gold. There is tons of money hiding in there for you to go and look at. And if I look at this, you can this shouldn't look like this. This is not normal. When somebody's looking at a power graph, it should be even, it should be symmetric. That's what we look for as clinicians. We're looking for patterns and we're looking for symmetry. This is not symmetric. We're having inconsistent striking force. We're having an unstable and weakened pushing force. And you can see how that develops over time, where at the top of the graph is our striking force, the bottom out is our pushing force. And you can see there, if each one of these is a step, we're missing stuff like at 2.7 seconds. Um, where are we going here? And then at the end of his gait, we start shuffling a little bit, and at the end of his cycle, he just sort of peters out. I mean, where does he go? So what this graph shows me is that we got poor toe-off mechanics, which is a red flag for me that I'm worried about a calf risk and even a hamstring issue. I have some variability in his striking force, so he's having a difficult time stabilizing on initial contact. So that's a deceleration issue, and we see a lot of soft tissue non-contact injuries when we decelerate, and we're overloading the posterior chain in that situation. So that striking force that's weak and a low pushing force, we're really looking at a reduced hip drive or some inability for him to generate that power, usually through hip drive, hip flexors, glute issues, and we're shifting a lot of load to that hamstring because of that shift of focus or compensation, I should say, into our posterior chain. So we're really, really loading up our hamstring. This is a classic tracing for somebody with the weak glute, poor hip drive, and a classic posterior chain recruitment. So this is hiding behind the T numbers, our T scores. And it matters because this is showing a fatigue pattern in real time. And it doesn't tell me, hey, are we pushing off on average? Are we just going through the motions, or are we actually producing a symmetric and even power situation? Same thing for stride. What you'll see here at the top is each little squiggly line is, so this is um, uh, the x-axis here is cycle time. So we're looking at how we move through each. So each one of these squiggly lines is a cycle. So if you look at, you'll count 10, 11, 12 little squiggly lines there, which are each of his stride, and the bright line through the middle is the average. That would be our T score, right? So if I look at the other squiggly lines, they're all over the place. And especially when we get to about 0.5 seconds, I'm having some stride issues here. And the early pattern is really good. If we look till we hit about 0.5 seconds of his gait cycle, everything looks okay. And then we start to have this breakdown at about 0.5 to 0.11 seconds where we begin to diverge. And there's an increased variability happening that is becoming, more scattered as we get towards the end of the cycle when he's fatigued at the end of that cycle. So it reflects a loss of coordination and a fatigue-linked motor drift in late swing and in the deceleration phase. So we're pooping out at the deceleration. We're getting tired in each single gait. And if you look at the end of this, it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. So this is something that builds from fatigue as we've already pre-fatigued the brain with the CPT. Clinical message here, even though the T score may be normal, the graph is revealing subtle instability in my son, his name is Finn, his motor control as the test progressed. Again, classic posterior chain fatigue. We're overloading our posterior chain. We have reduced glute drive, and we have hamstring and hip inhibition. So we're not getting hip drive out of this. And if you do a little bit of a mental exercise, and this was sort of the jump for me, was trying to look at this graph and understand where I was in the gait cycle. And we're going to dive into that and we get into later lectures, because guess what? There's more. There's way more detail in here that we're going to tease out. I just want to give you guys something you can play with this week and over the weekend, and you can look at some really superficial stuff. But there's more lurking in there. Key point: we've got a late phase wobble. Left side has got a lag on his left side. On the symmetry, which we'll see in a minute, we have a posterior sway and a balance graph we'll see in a minute. So he's compensating, And where we're having problems is how we decelerate, how we're finishing our steps. If we go to the balance profile, again, we have our bar graphs that we see in our PDF report, but we got this thing at the top, which is our balance graph. And this is looking down on top. If you were standing, if you had a drone and you were standing above your client and watching them walk, this is what you would see. And what I want to draw your attention to with Finn is that this is sort of the lighter line is sort of the average of every step or every step he took. The white is kind of where our T score is going to be, and we saw some of this in his T scores with his balance, and we can see that his gait is leaning backwards, right? He's got very little anterior posterior movement in his gait. And so I should think of those circles as the target. You should be kind of tight in that target. You shouldn't have too much front, too much back, too much left, too much right. And if you go back and start looking at some of your baselines, I get a lot of information out of this. You'll start seeing all kinds of crazy balance patterns. I mean, here we'll go through some of these in subsequent webinars. But he's not only leaning backwards, he's leaning to the left. So he's got a weak forward drive. He's not using his hip flexors or his quads. And we're having an over reliance again on our posterior chain, our glutes and hamstrings and calves. Because we're shifted to the left, we're talking about a glute medium, glute medius, glute minimum underactivation. So we're not firing those muscles. So there's a target right there I can use to try to activate somebody's glutes before they hit the field. We have a possible hip instability, and we have some pain avoidance. So we have to remember that Finn at this time had a little bit of a nagging piriformis issue that was left over from football, which we probably could have we probably could have seen coming before then from track. But anyway, clinical meaning posterior and left sway, classic for fatigue compensation. We have hamstring overload. If we're overloading our hamstring, we're going to have trunk compensation. We have lower back strain, and we have lateral instability under load. That's going to become an issue with this balance when we start cutting, pivoting, doing any sort of thing that causes rapid deceleration, right? When we need to change direction fast on a playing field or on a court, that's when we're going to break down with this sort of pattern. So the pelvic control is drifting backwards to the left. We're compensating for what we're lacking in stability here. And even though the strength looks fine in isolation, when we get to that sway pattern over here, when we look, it's telling us that we're putting a lot of strain on the posterior chain and our glutes. Same with our symmetry. We get the little bar graphs that we see. If we look at the symmetry graph here, early phase, we're pretty synchronous. Again, this is the average cycle time on the bottom, and the top is going to be our displacement. The grayed out areas are where our each step is located. The bright lines are our averages, our T score, if you will. And the darker purple tracing is the right leg. The lighter kind of pink tracing is the left leg. And you can see these do not look symmetrical. Even though we had some, our T scores were not outrageous. The two limbs look okay here at the beginning until, again, this is the number we've seen again with our power, with our balance, everything about 0.5 seconds when we start getting into the late phase of the gait cycle, halfway through our gait cycle, we are starting to decompensate for our areas of weakness. So around 0.5 seconds, the lines begin to diverge. And what we're really seeing here is this left leg. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but the left leg, which is the light pink sort of color, has got a really sort of slope to it and then a gradual recovery up to the 1 second, where the right leg has got a much more crisp cutting pattern to it. That's telling me that the left leg is dragging behind, or it's moving slower than the right leg. And that's where we begin to have a problem. The right leg completes its cycle before the left leg. And this showing us this mismatch is increasing as the stride progresses. And it's related to a fatigue related asymmetry, or we're compensating on what our weaknesses are on our left leg. The left side slower to recover, that's going to be a sign or a setup for a posterior chain fatigue issue. We're not firing our glutes. We may have a issue with our glutes not firing, or it's going to put strain on our glutes, particularly if they're not activated. And we have also a risk for a hamstring injury on that when we decelerate and because that leg is moving slower. So even though we look okay, um, and the numbers, the T's, particularly the T scores, the waveform is telling us that there's a late phase lag in that left leg and that there's a timing mismatch. And this is a really interesting hallmark of an eccentric load, overload, on our left leg, which is, again, an area for an increased risk of hamstring. So if I pair this with his hip pain, his low side power T score, slightly elevated CPT fatigue that we'll get to in a minute, it's going to show us that we have a compensatory overuse, or overload pattern on the left side, and our left side is at risk for something very bad to happen. Looking at the CPT scores, again, lower CPT scores are considered better. And I want you to kind of reframe how you look at the CPT score. It's not a pass-fail situation. It isn't, lower is always better. We're looking at this as sort of an athletic pattern. Again, we're looking for patterns. And I'll get to it in a later slide, but if I'm looking at it just sort of in a straight up, clinical setting, if I have a low T score with my hit reaction time, standard deviation, I have stable timing, consistent mental pacing. Finn was at 49, so he's just about base, 50 percentile for commissions. With that slight elevation, he's slightly impulsive, but within range, nothing to worry about. Variability is a little bit lower, still within our accepted kind of range. Clinically, there's really nothing to see here and move along. But if we look at it in terms of an athlete, and what that may mean, it could be a couple of different things. And we're going to see these, we're going to show you again, like Legos, how these patterns match up with gait movements, that mean different things in different circumstances. So in some cases, it could reflect an overload, or somebody is really straining to try to focus. It could show you that somebody is really cognitively focusing, and that can happen with enhanced fatigue. We'll start to see that progress with other scores that we'll bring in. Early signs of inhibition loss. If he's under pressure, is he taking risks? Is he predicting things quickly? Is he taking that risk? I'm going to bet money that next letter is not an X. And then as we go through, we're having a little bit of focus drift, and it's very subtle, but we have lapses, very subtle lapses of attention, especially when we pair that with what he's doing physically, and we start looking about how he's compensating or how he responds to walking after we've stressed his executive function centers out in his brain, right? So what? Finn's body, his brain was taxed out before we moved, so we pre-exhausted him with the cognitive. The gait test showed us posterior chain instability, reduced glute drive, left side compensation. All this together tells me that we're in a neuromechanical fatigue state, right? We're not at baseline for an athlete. We're at baseline for someone who's going to do concussion baseline and move on with life. But if I'm taking this athlete and trying to progress them through a season and train them and work with them and prevent injuries, I have actionable interventions that I can put into this situation. And if I look at this, it's kind of I look at this low relationship. So if we look at this kind of combination of his gait scores, which are on the y-axis, and his CPT scores, which are on the x-axis, we can see that we have this physical output like total power or side power. We can see where our cognitive effort is really high, so we're really focusing on what we're doing, which could be one of two things. I'm so tired, I have to really focus on this, which you might see at the end of the season, or it could be that I focused so hard on this, I'm really tired, and my gait broke down because of it. So context is important. How we match up, or how I match up CPT to gait correlation, how it matters, what it measures. So again, these are the big ones that I look at: hit reaction time, standard deviation, commissions, omissions, variability, and hit reaction time change. how it correlates to, again, what it measures we already went through, what it correlates to. Hit reaction time is gait symmetry. It matters because of variability in timing, step-to-step patterns. Clinicians, lateral power and sway, that's going to be trunk control. Or inhibition is rushed, uncoordinated motor firing. That's going to become an issue when we start about making quick movements on the fields, whether they're rapid decelerations to change direction, cutting, pivoting. Omissions, this is stride or swing phase imbalances, and that's an intention dropout. We could have completely erratic motor sequences in the gait cycle, which we kind of saw with Finn a little bit towards the end of some of his stride stuff. Variability, that's going to show us asymmetry in smoothness, and that's going to be inconsistency, a loss of rhythm. So we have changes of variability in our cognitive tests. We're going to have changes in variability and increased asymmetry in our gait. And the hit reaction time, ISI change, is going to be performance and balance issues, poor adaptability. Am I having problems step to step regaining my balance under load? And you may wonder, again, we talked about athletes being able to compensate. The thing to think about here is that the slower we can get the gait to move, the more unstable it becomes by nature, and the more things we can pick out. And if we think about how that relates to our frontal lobes and executive function and things we looked at in the brain, when we have timing, inhibition, and coordination errors that are happening from a fatigued brain that can't maintain some of those executive function things. Put that with an overloaded biological system like our hamstrings and posterior chains, we have trouble. Even though our CPT may be normal, some of our gait T scores are normal. We can see by going just a little bit deeper, there are some things here that are showing me that Finn may have some risks, or at the very least, some places where I can intervene. So now they understand what we're measuring, what we're looking, and a little bit of how you can interpret that data. What happens if I don't listen to the baseline? What happens if I put that back in my pocket and do nothing with it? Pop. And this is Finn, again, throwing him under the bus. I had that baseline in my pocket, didn't do anything with it. And Finn went out, and I had the video. I wish I could put the video up. He blew his left hamstring out in a track meet, first track meet of the season. And it was like a Hollywood movie. It was like you probably have seen this a million times. Someone shot him from behind and he just went down. And my wife was recording this, so these are stills from the video, but he ended up blowing out his left hamstring. Warning signs I missed for all the stuff that we talked about: power, side power, we had sway, we had symmetry lag. So I had inefficient hip extension, poor lateral force generation, inhibited glutes, delayed force transfer. That translates into pelvic instability, hamstring overload, hamstring compensation, which is what happens when you overload it. And we have poor deceleration mechanics. So when I look at those power graphs again, all that sort of summarized there. So when we look at those graphs, those tracings that we looked at, all the information is there. For trailing of the left leg, for stride, we had late phase drift. Balance, we had posterior and left sway. The symmetry graph, again, we had left leg lag. So we were holding together. We were within T scores. If we look behind the T scores, we had some compensatory patterns in there that were very textbook for a hamstring strain that I had in my pocket the whole time. And if I don't know 100%, but if I would have known that, there may have been some things I would have done with Finn in his training to take care of that situation so he didn't just do it. So if we build all of those blocks together, we start to see we take power, forward, side, sway time, symmetry, with his issue with his piriformis, and put those all together, we have just built a perfect storm for a very subtle situation to happen with his gait. When we throw the CPT in there, some of the little flags that we saw when we get behind the T scores were showing me that I have a post-executive function strain going on here as the gait fatigues, as we begin to go through the gait cycle. So the cognitive motor compensation here is active, and it is degrading as we go through his gait cycles. So here it is, another thing. And we're going to go through a whole nother lecture at some point where I'm going to show you, again, stacking the Legos together, how we use some of these tools to specifically target hamstring risk, app risk. We can maybe look at individuals who may be at increased risk for non-contact ACL tears, glute issues. compensatory back pain, which you already touched on. So there's tons of clues hiding in there. I'm kind of running out on time, but I just wanted to show you, we're going to come back to this case later on. But this was an individual, a professional athlete that was towards the end of the season that I was worried about. Nothing in his numbers showed me I should be worried about it. Um, he was practicing well. His recovery heart rate was great. His heart rate variability was great. Um, but I was really worried about his fatigue. And so I did a sport gait on him to see where he was. And I will do that. And one of the questions may be, Dr. P, how often do you do these? I will do an athlete every week. I particularly do it after a match, a day after a match, to see what my week is going to be like. If I'm taking somebody through a recovery of a hamstring or a calf, I will do it every day. The test-to-test reliability is so good with SportGate that allows me to have that. If I see a change, I'm positive that it's the athlete and it is not the test. So this individual had an elevated CPT scores. He had a lot of omissions and he had a lot of gait asymmetries that were pointing me to a calf ready to break down and mental exhaustion, which is what happened. We're going to come back to this case, but you can see if I combine the T scores with the gait, I'm having some emissions, side to side movement issues. I'm worried about what's going on with his calf, and I'm worried about what's going on with his back. For this, the emissions became relevant because it showed me inattention, cognitive fatigue, and slow processing. Those are the big things for me because I'm really worried about what's going to happen towards the end of a match when each decision that you make is really important. With the low gait is telling us that we're having a non-coordinated movement. Again, calf, hamstrings, and hips is what I was seeing with this. I'm really worried about what was going on in the soft tissue. And we'll talk about interventions, but what I ended up doing with this person was, and what I do with athletes is we don't decrease load. We improve recovery, and hopefully we'll have time to get to that. So just a kind of quick tip, low power, low balance, think of the calf, low power asymmetry, a loss of smoothness, think hamstring, history of hip pain, bet on the hamstring being overloaded, medial lateral sway, bet on calf or ankle. If you have ankle instability, which will show you why it matters, we can pinpoint the compensatory pattern and put in an intervention, a corrective exercise, something before a season-ending injury happens. And I tell athletes, and I think people probably want to punch me when I say this, is what is the biggest attribute you can bring to your team? The number one attribute you can bring to your team is to be available. And if you're in the trainer's room, you're not available and you lose your biggest attribute. But wait, there's more, and we'll get into these in later lectures. Down at the bottom where it says section details, there's even more data lurking in there. I don't know if anybody has looked at these gait tracings that exist deep inside of the SportGate app or on your desktop. But this is even more information. Even though those bar graphs that we see and the waveforms that we saw are derived from this same data, I can look at every single second of each and every step that the athlete is taking. And I don't know if anybody's ever played with these, but if you click on the medial, so there's AP acceleration, vertical translation, which is up and down acceleration, medial lateral acceleration, there's velocity is the same. There's also displacement. I didn't have room to put it on this screen. But if you click on each one of those boxes, it actually eliminates them from the screen. And I always say this looks like a spaghetti monster. And it's like if you put all 12 leads of an EKG onto one strip, this is what it would look like. And it would scare the heck out of anybody to take a look at this. And sometimes it can be a lot of resistance. But if you know you can eliminate each one of those and look at each factor independently, it can make things a lot more clear for you. We're going to dive in how to use this in subsequent lectures and how we can reinforce and find things that even we missed looking at our waveforms and our T-scores. And then at the bottom of that, we have this thing called the stabilogram and the 3D stabilogram. And the stabilogram is usually where I go first. And this is fins. And what we see in the stabilogram, which is on the left, we're looking at top to bottom would be medial lateral. I'm sorry, bottom to bottom axis is medial lateral, and across the top is AP, so front back displacement. And I can see here just by looking at fin that right leg has a little bit more fluidity to it. It's moving with a little bit. This should kind of look like a figure eight or a bow tie. We're getting a little bit more fluid movement in that right leg where that left leg isn't getting much displacement at all. It's very tight because it's not moving. The 3D stabilogram is great because you can click your mouse on it and move it. I can't on the screen, but you can move it around in 3D space and look at medial lateral, AP, ventral, translational, and move it around and be able to see all the components of the gait in 3D space, which is really, really cool. The other thing you can click on is the details of the CPT test, which is also money. And when you start seeing, we can see exactly where they are in each block. Each block has a specific function to it, and the number of time that, if you've taken it, the number of time, how fast the numbers show up, how much space is between each of the letters. And I can look at this and I see a fingerprint of where somebody's starting to get tired. When the numbers are coming fast and hard, I see a lot of errors. I see a lot of commissions. And you see that sort of it slows down at the end. So I can come to this and I can get a lot of information out of this as well. Final takeaway, consider the test sequence, the CPT and the gait, it matters. Predictive performance isn't about, diagnosing and thinking about, in that range. We're looking at predictive. We're trying to find patterns. Where are we at risk? How can we improve performance? Thinking beyond normal. The T-score is great for normative data, but if you think about functional blood analysis, we have a normal range and we have an optimal range. And for athletes, our optimal range may be very different than normative populace T-scores. So we have to look at the actual data itself and not rely so much on our T-scores if we're dealing with the return to play or or injury prevention program. And there's a lot of value in the subclinical findings, as you saw with Finn. In retrospect, maybe I could have, put him in a situation where that hamstring might not have happened, or made it less severe of an injury that he didn't play track again that year. He totally blew it out. He was over. So everything you already need is in the baseline. You just need to sit down and learn how to read between the lines. So your mission for the next webinar is to pick a couple of athletes um, and go through their baselines, grab their CPT scores, their gait scores, and look through them and look for power, look for CPT metrics, and look for all the different things that we're going to see. How does a low CPT score match with a gait degradation? Does a high CPT score, which would mean fatigue, pair with asymmetry or power? Look at these sort of patterns that you would see and think, well, if this was preseason, how would I do this differently? I look at Finn and how I would do things differently, which is why I sport gate him all the time, because I'm always looking for, how can I keep him uh, from missing time from his team. So we're not using data for diagnosis. We're looking for pattern recognition. We're looking for quiet fatigue and hitting risks before they become injuries. And I told you what I would do is give you a little bit of principles of what we do with TBRX with our athletes, and this will show you some uh, when we get to these individual injuries, some interventions you can take. Our big word is pliability, and that just is the ability for a muscle to be well vascularized. That means good arterial flow into it, good venous outflow to it, so we can get rid of metabolic toxins, and have the muscle be neurocognitively, neurofunctionally engaged in a healthy pattern with the brain. Where if you think of a muscle fiber, it's innervated at multiple spots by spinal nerves. And when you find tight areas, that's the spinal reflex, like the knee jerk, causing increased tension in that one spot in that muscle fiber. So what we do with pliability is we try to shut off that reflex so that that muscle is now what we call it soft and pliable. So we don't have areas of tenseness in the muscle that it can move through its range of motion, a full range of motion under force and under speed without injury. And we'll talk about that in subsequent lectures. Our big thing, and this is where I'll end, other pillars. This is what we deal with, and this is where we should start on every baseline with an athlete. What's your hydration? How much water do you drink? We are all chronically dehydrated. There's no question about that. And this is particularly true for athletes, where the general rule of drinking half your body weight in ounces of water does not hold for athletes. Even the American College of Sports Medicine recommendation of extra ounces per 30 minutes of exercise, I don't think is sufficient. Um, so we have to, if you're going to deal with an athlete, take these questions. What's your hydration? Let's talk about your nutrition. What are you eating? Are you eating pro-inflammatory foods? Are we eating a whole-based diet? Are we moderating what we're eating? McDonald's once in a while, not so bad. McDonald's every day, it's not going to be all that great for you. Um, Sugar every day, not so great. Occasionally, I like to have Rice Krispie Square. Not a problem. I had some Chips Ahoy last night. Not a problem. Mental fitness, and this is where our big one is. And mental fitness for us isn't just being able to everything that we do when we get to movement is a neurocognitive function movement. We combine the brain and body. I say doing a TBRX workout is like playing the drums. All four limbs have to be doing something different at the same time. It really gets our cognitive and motor functions in line with what we're doing as an athlete. But that also comes with attitude. It also comes with our ability to recover and be mentally pliable, um, dealing with stress, dealing with adversity, being able to have the proper mindset when particularly if you're injured or if you're a substitute or things aren't going your way. How can we reframe our situation? I always say to Finn, I say never give pain a voice because pain will win the argument every single time. When we're working on a problem I feel like I'm getting you always say it in a different way. Like I feel like I'm getting stronger. I feel like it's getting better. It's kind of going to hurt when you go through rehab sometimes. And if you say, oh, it hurts, that's all your brain knows. So reframe it. Hey, that's our body getting better. That's us improving. That's every day I'm getting a little bit better. How you frame things is really important for us. And we'll go through each of these in each injury scenario as we go. I'm a little over time because we had a late start. So I will stop sharing, Beth, and I know it's a bit of a delay. I will exit and come back to my screen and wait for you.
Perfect. I don't see any questions that have come through at this point, just more of comments, just saying, Joe Rafter says, love working with you, Pete. Tons of wisdom here. We had some people joining us from Boston. They were on from the beginning. So just positive comments. But if anybody does have any questions, I'm monitoring the chat right now. Feel free to leave any questions and we'll try to get back to you. We're also going to be downloading this. We were recording, so it's going to be going up on our YouTube channel. We'll send that. And then we're also going to be following up with how to download the SportGate app and get started on that as well. So stay tuned for some messages from us.
I'd be curious to ask if anybody wants to volunteer in the chat. Is anybody using this app in this way? Is anybody um, using it as something other than just a concussion baseline test? Has anybody already kind of discovered the secret gems hiding in here? Anybody?
No,
Bueller?
nothing so far.
Bueller? Bueller?
Nothing so far, Pete.
All right. Nothing.
No, but we will be able to.
Either I totally confused everybody or I explained it perfectly. It's always nervous when you never get a question.
There may be a little bit of a delay too with the chat. Is very likely
Yeah.
as well with the live and streaming it. Monica just responded and said, no, this is the first I've seen these extra resources, but glad to know they are there.
Great. But have some fun with it, Monica. Pull out a couple of baselines that you've done and take a look. And particularly um, kids who or athletes, I don't know what population you're dealing with, who may have already had issues. It's interesting to think about too, if you look at the correlation between concussion and lower limb extremity injuries later in the course of even the next year, whether they be hamstrings or ACLs, um, and think about are we missing things in our rehab, not just in a proprioceptive kind of way or strength training kind of way with our ACLs, or are we getting our gait back to normal with that too? So I think um, take a look and see what you have out there. Monica, the only brave one? Nobody else?
Nobody else yet.
Do you have any questions?
I do not. I do not, but feel free to connect. Pete and I are both on LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to reach out at any time. We are going to be doing these webinars every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. So we'll be launching the next one Friday. The invites will go out. So be sure to be on the lookout for an invite for next week's webinar.
Great. And you can always reach me at my LinkedIn, also my Instagram at Peter Cummings MD, and at the TBRX Instagram at TBRX Sports. We're happy to chat.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Pete. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will see you next Wednesday at noon.
Great. Thank you, Beth.
Perfect. Have a good one. Bye.